Welcome back to the Known Experience. We are entering into part 2 of the 2023 recap. I'm John, and this is Sean with us, coming from North Carolina. I'm here in Texas.
So.
I just started watching The Bear a couple nights ago, and have you watched it?
Yes. It gave me heartburn. If you're in the industry, there are some things with it that are, outlandish, but
yeah,
if you've ever been around a kitchen and the dysfunction,
yeah,
it's intense.
yeah. I thought it was going to be less dark and
No, it's
stressful
dark.
than it is,
Oh,
but no, it's may your kitchen not be like that. And
oh man.
but
It's the calmest, coolest kitchen I've ever been around.
that's
It's
great.
kudos. Yeah. So
Heard.
yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to jump in. We're going to revisit the other half of our guests from our first year of the Known Experience podcast. And I want to jump in with Dr. Steven Garber. He is an author, a speaker, a consultant, the Washington Institute for Faith, Vocation, and Culture. And there was just one quote from his podcast that really stood out to me. And I know, Sean, you like this one because you're all about preparation. And this is the quote from Iris Murdoch. He said, "At crucial moments of choice, most of the business of choosing is already over."
Yeah.
What does that speak to you, Sean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just I found myself in the moments of choice. Really, you're just looking for an affirmation that nudges you over the line. At least I do.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I have prepared, I've thought through it, I've analyzed it, I've usually gone through the emotions. And then, like you think you're just making the decision then, but you're really not. But I had not thought about it in that way until he said it. And it was a very aha moment, no doubt about it. But yeah, I think we give far too much weight to the moment of decision and not nearly enough to the preparation. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Or,
I mean, there's moments of decision that are coming up, right? I mean, you're graduating college, I need to be making a decision on what I'm going to do next, or end of a job or whatever. But there's those moments of decision that come upon you that you do not know it's going to happen, and you're not prepared for it per se. You haven't thought through it. And the character you've built, the things you've invested your time in, all of that will make your decision for you in that
correct.
moment, right? I've heard
Right.
athletes talk about this a lot. Athletes just emphasizes the preparation. It's the preparation. It's the preparation. And then you step in, I'm a big UFC fan. You step into the ring, and if you haven't prepared well, like, you don't know what to do, and you're just reacting instead of responding with things. We talk about that Mike Tyson quote, right? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I've heard that quote thrown out there like 1,000 times, but I've never heard anyone say this. Well, what if you have a plan for getting punched in the face? Because good UFC fighters, they have a plan. What happens if I get taken down and I'm on my back? They have a plan for that.
Yeah.
So I would say in the everyday world, we don't often enough have a fail plan for what if things don't work out the way they had hoped they would.
Yeah, is quite astonishing. I feel like I always have 4 different lives planned out in my head, based on if something happens.
Yeah,
which may not be healthy, but that's why I've never been that fearful with the decision, because I always have a contingency.
Yep.
And it's not. I don't. It's never built on surpassing expectation. It's always if the wheels fall off.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what I have to work on. But I'm always like, man, something's gonna go horribly wrong. Am I ready for it?
Yeah, some people are on the other side of like, what am I going to do when everything goes right and I've got to scale this or whatever.
Right.
Like, I think visionary people often think that way, and that's great. I don't have that either.
I'm a weird hybrid of the two, and it's interesting, but I feel like I always do have a plan to get punched in the face. I don't know.
Well,
man.
on that note, let's move on to Brian Carpenter. Brian is the founder of the Refuge Foundation, a great retreat experience they're in Montana and Wyoming, I think, right?
Yeah, but I think they expanded their location in Montana. I think they're just doing the Montana in the future.
But something that really stood out to me from his conversation is this quote: "Awareness is not a giver of solace. It is a disturber and an awakener. And that was like a gut punch. Like, oh
Yeah.
wow.
Well, think
It,
about that too, right? I mean, aware, like when you are aware of the multifaceted parts of who you are and what make it like it, that it is a disturber, right? Never mind the external world, but when you are aware of who you are,
mhm.
oof,
That's why
it's
when someone points out one of your flaws, like our reaction is often to be defensive because it's like, oh, they see, they know that. I thought I was
correct.
hiding that. I thought I was,
Right.
and it hurts. But
Right.
you know, our whole show is about the known experience. It's about knowing yourself and being known, being willing to be known, and that's a scary thing for a lot of people because it's not comforting sometimes. You know, I mean, going back to ignorance is bliss, right? Like I think about my work in recovery and addiction, and a analogy or a metaphor we'd use sometimes is Jonah in the belly of the whale, because Jonah, you know, when he started out on the boat, right, and he's sleeping in the midst of the storm, like in the hull of the ship, and the other people on the boat are freaking out because of this storm and all of this chaos that's the result of him. Like he's the cause of it, but he's the least disturbed by it, right? And I think that can be our life sometimes if we're blissfully ignorant. The other people around us are still paying the consequences of our flaws and our failures and our problems. And it's only when we get up and take responsibility for them that's when it was kind of resolved, right? Awareness is not going to be fun when you first open yourself up to it, but it's the only way out, right? Like it's
Yeah.
kind of like if you can't go into a doctor and ignore or deny all your symptoms and expect that doctor to help you get better.
What are you talking about? That's the American way, buddy.
That's
That's how we
that
do.
was my dad.
Right.
But I do think, especially with men, there is an era, and a lot of us are holdovers from that era that was like, no, suck it up, duct
Yeah.
tape it, don't complain about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt.
Well, from that, let's go to Stephen Murray. Stephen is my personal friend. That's the director of Forerunner Mentoring, and their motto is "Relationships change lives." Sean, what do you remember about talking to Stephen and about they provide a mentor for young men who don't have a positive male figure in their home?
I mean, it's one of those things where, I feel super privileged, or it's hard to even comprehend growing up as a young boy without access to that.
Mhm.
Right. I had so many men in my life that even if my father wasn't there was multiple layers of men involved in my life that had a positive effect. And so, you know, that's what kept running through my mind with him is the incredibly difficult work that it is in dealing with just all that entails to not have a father figure, but then just how important it is too. The stats, I think you have some stats around it, but I think we so often, there's just so many foundational parts of being a human that we address, but we don't really give the full weight to. And that's one
Mhm.
of them, right?
Yeah.
He's not having that person in your life is just incredibly crippling. It's got to be, right? I
Yeah.
mean, again, I feel like I'm an aware person, but I have a hard time putting myself in that place and really trying to understand
Mhm.
and empathize what it would be like. So,
And not even just on a conscious level, on a subconscious level, what it means to them that they're not even aware of because they've told
right,
themselves, "I don't need that," because they never
correct,
had it, right?
right,
But I think one of the stats is that, you know, if a kid has at least one positive male figure in their life for 1 hour a week,
right.
they're 80% less likely to go to jail. 1 hour a week. Which a lot of kids don't even get their dad for 1 hour a week, right?
Yeah,
If their dad's
yeah,
in the home. But you think about these boys growing up with not a single male leader figure in their life that they've ever been able to trust or count on. They've all let them down. And then
right.
you come in as a mentor. How many years does it take to build that trust
Yeah.
for them to open up. You may meet them at 14 and you've got them for maybe 4 years. It may take that much time just for them to even begin to think about trusting you, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, the one stat that really hit me that I just wanna just give kudos to their program and all that they're doing, 75% of all high school dropouts don't have a male figure in their home. I'm gonna say it again, 75% of all high school dropouts don't have a male figure in their home. And we said, "Steven, how many kids in your program are dropping out of high school?" And he said, "0."
Yeah. That was so awesome.
That's amazing. Steven talks about, like, going upstream from the problem, and if you wanna provide help and invest in something that's working upstream from the problems that we see in society today, check out Forerunner Mentoring. They're in Lake Highlands here in Dallas. Check them out. Would love for you to invest in them. That would mean a lot to me.
Yeah.
Man, this brings us to one of our really fun podcasts that we did with Matthew Berry. Matthew is the director of fantasy sports for NBC. Previous to that, he was with ESPN for 15 years. He's the author of the book My Fantasy Life, and he's a friend of mine from high school. And Sean, you're kind of like you were in that, but what's that like to hear us? We were going back a lot of old high school stories where you like
Yeah, you were. You were. I don't want to talk about fantasy. My team was a disaster this year with injuries and whatnot. It was a
yeah.
not a good year.
Yeah. Did you draft a lot of Patriots?
No, I didn't draft one. I'm not stupid.
Not even Zeke?
Not even Zeke. No.
Mm.
Zeke's best days are behind him. No, I think the George Carlin story was my biggest takeaway.
Yeah.
Besides you guys reminiscing, it was what a cool, you can think what you do about George Carlin and who he was, but his approach to, creating time for, just understanding the importance of creating fans for life by
Yeah.
giving them 30 seconds of your time is just, it's so applicable to the everyday man too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if you haven't listened to the podcast, Matthew, when he first went to Hollywood, his first job was working on the George Carlin show. And if you're under 50, George Carlin is a comedian who's no longer with us, but he was very outrageous. He was one of the first kind of shock comedians.
And he was massive in the 70s and 80s, right? Like,
Yeah,
massive.
huge. He was as big as any comedian could possibly be. So much so that he got his own TV show. But Matthew was his like production assistant, entry level job, picked up his dry cleaning, did all the dirty work for him. And he had some friends visiting the set of the show. And he just said, "Hey, George, is there any way I could get all my work done so I could leave right after the show? I have friends visiting." And George said, "Sure." So after the show, Matthew was showing his friends around the set, and George came up and said, "Hey, Matthew, are these your friends?" And Matthew was like, "Oh my gosh, yes." And George just gushed about how great Matthew was and how they couldn't do the show without him. And he brought them autographed pictures. And afterwards, Matthew said, "George, thank you so much. Like, why did you do that?" And George said, "Matthew, I had 3 minutes with those people. And that is how they will see me and perceive me the rest of my life, the rest of their lives."
And talk about me to everyone about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in 3 minutes, you can either blow somebody off or you can give them a memory. And I'd much rather do that. And, Sean and I took away from that, like, how many times do we may not be famous and people looking up to us, but how many times do we have a moment that we could just invest 5 more minutes to make somebody's day, right? By being kind or just doing something to help them or something they're not expecting, right?
No, again, it's totally applicable to business. I think that was, it's business and everything, but
especially a hospitality industry that you're in. There's a great hospitality book called Unreasonable that's about that very thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so much fun too, right? I think that's the best part about my industry is when you get to surprise people with small things and they're just like, wow.
Yeah.
And I don't do that. I don't do that with like, okay, this is going to be I'm going to get a return customer. And for me, it's more about life, right? It's about people feeling seen, and you don't know the ripple effect of that, right? Like if maybe they feel very invisible in their life, and for the moment you kind of make them feel visible. That's what I hope for all those circumstances is maybe it'll breathe life into them.
That's great.
But yeah.
The one story that Matthew didn't tell that I want to tell real quick, and he's just told it so many times, I think he felt like everybody's heard it, but everybody has not heard it. And again, like Matthew and I were in high school together. Matthew was this kid that was really smart. He was from a family, grew up in the Northeast. He's in this small Texas town now. And he was like the number one tennis player on our tennis team, but not like super popular. He was, he and I were both popular adjacent. We were accepted by the popular crowd, but everyone knew we weren't one of them. And so we went from that to struggling in Hollywood as a writer to getting this gig and being like the guru of fantasy sports for the world, really. And he got a request from a friend to come into New York City and help out with a fantasy football draft. And he said to his friend, as a friend in the industry, he said, I just have to politely decline. I get these things all the time. And I'd love to do it, but I got to kind of guard my time. And the friend goes, would it make a difference if this was for Jay-Z? And Matthew goes, yeah. When should I be there? So he shows up at this club in the middle of an afternoon in New York City, and he gets escorted up, and Jay-Z is waiting for him. That he and his hip hop moguls have rented out this entire club for their fantasy football draft. He gets introduced to Jay-Z. He walks in with Jay-Z, and there's all these guys, Russell Simmons, all these guys are in this room that are like the moguls of hip hop. And Jay-Z walks in with Matthew Berry, and they go, oh no, Hove, you can't bring Michael Jordan to a pickup game. And they're saying that like Matthew Berry is the Michael Jordan to them. And so for Matthew, I mean, Chris Pratt, all these people text Matthew. He was in an Avengers movie. They text him because he's their Michael Jordan for fantasy sports. And that just still today like blows my mind, but I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty cool.
And I love how he carries it. He is humble. And if you ever look at him on social media, he's like, man, I can't believe I get to do this. I can't believe this is my life. It still blows him away. So,
yeah,
man, let's get into one of our more controversial episodes. We've not had a lot of them, but Dr. Jake Hyde, who would define himself possibly as a brain chiropractor. He said he adjusts people's brains. And what this is one of your old friends from West Palm days. Tell me about Dr. Jake and what's you remember from that episode.
I have known Jake for a long time. But I think Jake was one of the guys that introduced me to let's stop treating the symptoms in your body and let's work on how your mind is connected to your body. And whether you agree or don't, that's what I love about Jake. And even his conversations, he is a blend of the psychology, anatomy, physiology. He kind of blends all this into a soup that a lot of traditional medical doctors probably wouldn't agree with. Yeah, he's an interesting guy to talk to. But I think my history has blended with the episode. So what part stuck out to you in that conversation, or what parts? I know you had a few.
I mean, there are a few things I was a little skeptical of. I think he puts everything in the mental basket,
Right.
Like
Mind
all
over matter.
diseases caused by fatigue, I think was one of his quotes, which takes any sort of genetic elements out of it, right? But I will say he really reaffirmed something that I've come to believe more and more, and that is how much our thoughts produce chemicals or responses by our body that affect our health, right? I think we all know, like when you're stressed, you feel it in your stomach, you feel it in your gut, it affects your digestive system, it affects your sleep, you feel fatigue. I just went through an incredibly intense time of stress, and the amount of fatigue I felt over the mental stress was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And so he reminded me how much that there's a lot of our thoughts we can choose. There's a lot of our focus that we can choose, and that greatly affects our bodies. And that's what I took the most away from it.
Yep. Yeah.
he talked about psychosomatic, which a lot of people will translate as, well, it's just all in your head if you have a psychosomatic health problem. But his question was fair. He said, what's not in your head? Like, this conversation is in your head. Everything at some point, if it's, unless it's completely subconscious, goes through your head, and that impacts things in your body and in your life. So
Yeah, and to maybe to his point, science still knows very little about how the brain operates.
mhm.
So I think maybe he's come to his own conclusions that maybe founded on data or lack thereof. But I think he does have a point. Like there's a lot we don't understand about how much our brain controls or affects our body. So
Yep. And that quote we shared in a previous episode, the Carl Jung quote of, until your subconscious becomes conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate. I tie that into the Tiger Woods story of people subconsciously self-sabotaging when they have unresolved issues in their life. If you don't listen to that episode for anything else, listen to it for the Tiger Woods story, because that was like, okay, that feels very true to me. So curious about that. Let's move on to Ethan Stonerook. This was one of my favorites. Great guy, professor at Wake, associate professor at Wake Forest School of Medicine. He teaches doctors and nurses how to live more holistically with their patients, how to accompany their patients in the journey. What do you remember from that time with Ethan?
yeah, just what an incredible, still the hope for that developing in the medical world is so critical. Just how much, we forget that doctors are human. Maybe they forget it, they compartmentalize. So his work in kind of creating a more empathetic, again, we say it so much, but holistic way of operating for them
Mm-hmm.
is so important, because if we don't, I think it, again, just like Jake Hyde, we kind of leave out a big piece of the puzzle. Yeah, Ethan, I would love to do a part two with him, or like a round table with other medical professionals.
Historically, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists have been taught nurses to detach yourself from the person as a human, and more just treat the medical symptoms. That it's bad. You lose sight of things, you lose your ability to act,
Objectivity.
yeah,
Yeah.
objectively. And his studies and his work is the opposite of that. And it's, how can you enter into their journey as a human, as a person? And one of the things he talked about, he said, the most privileged place for me is to be together with another person in their joy and their suffering. I would greatly appreciate having doctors that related to me in that way.
But that's not easy, right? So I think it's going back to the Brian quote, that awareness that would take from doctors would be, they couldn't see as many people
Yeah.
if they truly entered in, because there's a cost to that, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a benefit to us, but there's a cost for them,
Yeah.
person after person, to
Yeah.
enter into their life in a way that is more caring. And he talked about a sack full of stones that they carry.
Yeah.
That's no joke. So
Yeah, I think that's another thing that he really teaches them, is how to manage what he would call collateral trauma that
yeah.
you carry, you pick up as a result of going through these things with people. How do you carry that? How do you let it go? How do you release it? The one quote that I really loved from his conversation was from Dr. Warren Kinghorn. Ethan quoted him, and he says, "We're not machines to be fixed, but wayfarers to be attended to." We're not machines to be fixed, but wayfarers to be attended to. And I would say, outside of the medical world, even in the faith world, in the church world, I think people are very much communicated with as, hey, you're this broken machine that the whole rest of your life, God's going to be helping you fix. And all you're ever worried about or concerned about is what needs to be fixed next. What problems else do I have? Instead of, like, accompanying and attending to that person, and even emphasizing you. I think it was Brennan Manning would say, you are loved as you are, not as you should be. It's not like, you're loved in spite of who you are. You are loved as you are. You are fully accepted and loved, and dare I say perfect as you are, not that you can't grow and improve, right? How do you do with that one, Sean? How do you do with being content as you are?
I'm not good at that.
I didn't just ask that question like without
Yeah.
some sort of intuition.
Yeah. No, I am not that guy. I don't know. I think one of the parts of my continued growing is to understand that which you can control or change, that which you shouldn't.
The serenity prayer, right? To change what
Right.
I can, to accept when I cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference, right?
Yeah, but then where how to exist peacefully and joyfully in the midst of that,
Yeah.
it's not easy, man.
It's not easy, and it's not easy for anybody, but I think it's so crucial, especially for parents. I'm not a parent, but because it's all transferred, right? Like other people around us, if we don't love and accept ourselves, we cannot make other people feel loved and accepted.
Yeah.
We're definitely going to project on them. Another favorite quote of mine is, whatever you think you have to do to earn God's love, you will require other people to do in order to earn your love.
Mm.
And I think until we learn to love and accept ourselves today as I am, not perfect, not there yet, and aware of my flaws, i- if I can't learn to love myself in that moment, there's no way I can help other people feel unconditionally loved, right?
I think it's the one of the challenges is to know in the I keep going back to the awareness part, but in the journey of knowing, exploring and awareness, you question, you're like, do I really love myself if I don't know myself? If I'm not aware, and I think that goes to the nth degree with me, right? Like when you think through things,
Mhm.
you're like there's more to know about myself. And I'm not, I have such a problem. This is like a therapy session. I have such a problem with the word love. I don't, on a human level, I don't even know if I believe that it exists in its entirety. We've talked about this, but so it's a challenge for me, I think. But I think you're right about what you said.
I mean, I think a good reframing of love is willing the highest good for another person.
Yeah. And that's what the Catholics say, right? Isn't that like a very Catholic thing? Will the good of the other?
I don't know. I got that from a mentor of mine years and years and years ago. But I
No.
did hear something. Actually, I'm reading a book called Wired for Love by Harville Hendrix, I think is his name. But he just talks very much about your perspective of love shifting from a feeling or something you can get to a choice that you make to give. And that I'm more and more seeing like
Yeah,
is what it's all about.
that makes more sense.
Man, let's land on our last podcast, which was actually our first, other than the one where we introduced the pod. Dr. Rob Murray, who you spent some time with recently, and he's the author of the book Fighting for Heart in
Yeah.
Leadership.
Yeah.
It's by far our most listened to podcast. He's great. But he started off, man, this was our first guest, and he started by sharing this story about his wife asking him if they could talk
Yeah.
after a long day. And he said, I knew it was not one of those talks of she's going to just pump me up and affirm me with all the great things that I've done. I knew she needed to have a talk.
Yeah.
And in a sense, she said, you're a great man and you do a lot of great things for our family. But when I'm with you, I feel lonely. And I thought, wow. I mean, as a husband, could you relate to that, Sean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. I think that's, I maybe to Rob's credit, I don't really know, but yesterday at dinner, I sat down and I was like, Nat's sitting there, the kids, and I'm like, listen, before New Year's, I want you guys to think about this the next couple of days. in like, what do you want from yourself this new year? What do you want from this family? And and what are some things that you wish would be better, right?
Mm.
And I said, because one of the things that I don't want and that you see happen in a lot of families is they move through life and seasons change, and they don't really care to be around each other, and they don't communicate, and they don't ask, and that's not what I want for this family. I was not directing my it to Selah, and I was like, you're going to be 13 this year, and a lot of people would say you're not supposed to like your parents, and you're not supposed to enjoy hanging out with them, but I don't think that has to be the reality. I think that's something that we all should challenge. And if we love our families and if our families love us, then you can still enjoy to be around them and ask more of them. And I said, I don't want to be the dad that's tired and grumpy. Like I felt like my dad was a lot, like unapproachable. And when I want to say sorry if I've done something wrong, and I want you guys to hold us to account if we're not treating you well. I said, it's just about our family. And I think that I'd never really been good at doing that before. And I think Rob, when he talked about kind of being honest with your family as a father, that landed for me. I don't remember exactly what he said about
Mm.
that, but it was
He talked about being honest with your kids. I know this really resounded with you in that podcast. He talked about being honest with your kids when you've had a bad day and
yeah,
saying, you're not unpacking the whole day to them, but saying,
right,
"Hey, I've had a rough day. If I seem distant tonight or impatient, I'm not making excuses for it, but I just want you to know I've had a rough day."
right. Yeah, and I think it's just, going back to, Natalie, his Natalie and my Natalie. Yeah, I mean, you just want to, yeah, you're checking a lot of boxes sometimes as a dad and
Mhm.
husband, and you're kind of forgetting about like the real critical one. But it's also just not easy, man. I think you try to do it all. Like, in a relationship now, you try to, when you're trying to lead and be present and make money and create opportunity and be fun and be available, and it's also a lot, right? I think, you know there's a lot to it when you're trying to be firing on all the cylinders.
Yeah.
So I do have empathy for dads that shut a lot down,
Mhm.
because it's really self-preservation. The more that I think about dads, and maybe my own dad, they're not unavailable because they really want to be. I think they're unavailable because it was more of a survival mechanism, and they just weren't talking about it.
Yeah. They didn't know how to,
Yeah.
and they never had it modeled. When you talked about what you just shared with your family, I think about a leader that I had that was the first time in my life that a leader ever wrote me at the end of the year, sent me an evaluation asking me to evaluate him. And he said, "Okay, how can I serve you better as a leader? Is there anything you don't have that you need? Are you able to get responses from me in a timely manner when you need them? And then is there anything else you need from me going forward in the next year?" I'd
Mm.
never in my life had a leader ask me those kinds of
Right.
questions, right? And
Right.
what leadership role is more important than the role of a parent? And so how many of us have had our parents ask us those questions, right? Usually it's we're complaining, kids complain, our complaints are not reasonable, and
Right.
someday you'll understand, right?
Correct.
It's like, what good does that do me? Right.
Right.
But
True.
no, I love that you did that with them. And I think, in all the ways that we fall short, if we could just be honest and open and let them know that the communication path is open.
Right.
I told you I've been listening to Bono's memoir on Spotify. If you haven't done it, it's whatever you think of Bono, I encourage you to listen to it. It's on Spotify Premium. It's called Surrender. And he was talking about he had 5 kids, and he goes, with every one of them, when they were moving into their teenage years, I sat them down and said, "Hey, here's what usually happens. Most kids, the first like 10 to 12 years of their life, they love their parents. We're the best. You love us being around. You want our attention. And then there's a period about another 10 years or so that you can't stand to be around us. We're a pest. You don't like us. And we are antagonistic towards each other. And then you get older and suddenly you find some wisdom in us and we are on good terms and we look forward to spending time together. That's what most young people do. And he goes, I'm all up for us skipping that middle part if you want to skip it. What do you think? And he said, I'm thankful that every one of my kids said, I want to skip it. And we never went through it.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's good.
And I don't know that it's that easy to do, but
No.
I think if you at least can talk about it instead of it being a kid who feels awkward and feels like their parents don't understand and they don't even know what they feel or how to communicate it, and there's just this impasse of no communication, and both of you are just annoyed with each other for like a decade. Somehow there's got to be a better way to navigate that, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's really, I'm convinced it's entering into things that interest them, right? So the communication piece, but just I think a lot of parents are like, oh, that's what they like doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Kids these days.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they like doing, right?
Yeah.
So
or making fun of it, making fun of the language they use, making fun of the way that they dress, telling them you don't like it. They don't, instead of being like, hey, tell me more about this, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think even more so that's becoming evident. It's easier when they're little, right? But as my daughter's aging, yeah, I think that you can, I think you hopefully, and maybe it's just my hope, I think you can skip that oil and water season. I think it's because I think they'll be able to see you in a much, how should I say, teenagers can still see your effort, right? I believe that so whether or not you love each other all the time,
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that. I think that there'll be an admiration for the effort that both put into it because they love each other and they're willing the good of the other.
And I think he said, I fully accepted my role as a dad of being awkward and annoying and not funny and not cool. And I accepted that without taking it personally. And they would joke about it and we just kind of accepted it together. And I think that's, I think sometimes parents it just is as insecure as anyone else. And when your kids don't like you or think you're cool, if you take it personally, it's not going to turn out well.
Right.
So man, our first episode, Why the Known Experience, I don't think we need to go back and rehash all that, but I would just say if you're listening to this for the first time, go back and check it out. We're all about helping primarily men, because we're men, experience self-awareness, personal growth, helping other people know them and being vulnerable in that way, and being curious to know each other, spend time together, ask questions. I was having a conversation last night with somebody and they said, what's your number one value in a friend? And in the past, it would have been a lot of different things. Could have been trust, could have been faithfulness, could have been a lot of things. But I would say today it is curiosity. Do they ask questions about my life? Do they ask follow-up questions? Do they just reach out in a random day and say, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? And to me, that's the opposite of self-absorption. That's the opposite of selfishness. And I think that's, if we're all chipping away at something that we need to grow in, it's probably that, right? That's probably our center idol, is just like the tendency to become self-focused and self-absorbed.
Yeah. Well, because curiosity, the framework of curiosity is humility, it's empathy, it's grace. Like curiosity isn't in a silo, right? It's built of some really positive attributes.
Yeah. It speaks a lot of a person, right? And that there's that famous Ted Lasso episode where he talks about curiosity versus judgment. I think it's a Walt Whitman quote, but choose curiosity rather than judgment when someone's different than you. And it's a whole different journey, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a good one to end on.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for hanging with us this year. Thank you for hanging with us through this episode. Sean and I have talked a lot about what we want to see in the coming year, and I'm excited about it. I think we're going to spend some more time together to just grow in this stuff as people. If you have any suggestions or ideas for a guest, we would love to hear it. Please share it with us. And yeah, Sean, any other words before I wrap things up?
No, no, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think John and I talked about it. We're going to be not more mindful, but I think more deliberate in
Mm,
how we kind of frame out and structure the next year. So
yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. In January, we're going to take some time to really plan rather than just have guests on and kind of randomly hit on things. We want the next year to be
Mhm.
a little bit more like, this is what we're covering and this is why the person's here. And so it'll be good, but we're definitely going to continue. There's no quit here. I look forward to another year. I mean, if this next year is as eventful as last, holy crap.
We'll have lots to talk about. Well, this
Yeah.
is, when we first started talking about this, we said, if we do 20 episodes, it'll be a success. Most podcasts don't last 3 episodes. So
Yeah.
I think this is episode 18 or
18.
19. So we're
Yeah.
close there, and we're definitely going to blow past that. So, brother, I love you, and I'm grateful to do this with you. It's good for my heart and my life, regardless of what anybody else gets out of it.
100%.
So thank you for showing up again and again.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, guys, we're going into the new year. I'm not sure if we'll get this out before the new year hits. It'll be close. But yeah, as always, John and I really hope that you find a sense of awareness of yourself, and in that comes curiosity to know others, to be known, as uncomfortable as it can feel, and to live a life that is more holistic and open to what that can bring. It's only positive, and I truly believe that, as difficult as life has been for John and I through the seasons and this year, and I definitely wouldn't change that. There's not one piece of what we're doing that I would regret. And I think poor, rich, minority, majority, Republican, Democrat, what we're talking about is something that men especially need to practice with intention going into this next year. So thanks for joining us on this selfish journey
Mhm.
of what it is for us to be known and help others in that experience as well. So for John, this is Sean, and Happy New Year to you. Take care.